Welcome to Trinity Radio. You found the Christian channel that loves atheists, and today we're talking about what TikTokers have to say about free will. And we're going to start with this excitable guy.
You believe in free will? Let me prove you're wrong. It's going to blow your mind.
I'm ready.
Because the fantasy of a free will causes you so much trouble, makes you judge yourself, and keeps you in the ego illusion. So let's start with some examples.
Let's talk about some terminology for a second. On the one hand, you've got determinism. Determinism is the notion that things, you may feel like you're making choices, but things literally could not have been otherwise. All of the past history of the universe, right up into your parents conceiving of you, the formation of your neural structure, your genetics, all of that, and the firing of neurons in your brain that ultimately we call your choices, and they are your choices, but they could not have been otherwise, right? That's determinism. On the other hand, you have libertarian freedom. Libertarian freedom is the notion that whatever you ended up doing, you really could have done something other than that. Or at the very least, what libertarian freedom means is, while you may have influences from stimuli outside of yourself or beyond yourself, or the past history of the universe leads you to certain influences, you actually get to determine among those. It's not that they don't impact you. It's just that you can decide which thing you're going to do in the face of those influences.
It is my free will that I want to eat a chocolate bar now. Oh, really? Is this a free will wanting that? Or might that will be influenced or dependent on the frustration you feel right now and you wish to feel some physical pleasure? Also, your previous experiences with chocolate bars, where you learn that it makes you feel good for a second, and the fact that you have a digestive system which needs some kind of food from time to time? Saying your will is free means it would be independent, free from any influence, and you could just decide what you want your will to be like. We are not speaking about the freedom to act upon your will here. We are speaking about the inner process inside of your mind.
Now, what the person in the video is saying is that, hey, since we are aware of the influences that we have, we can't deny those, and we can't deny our biology, and we can't deny past history. It seems like the best explanation is that all of our actions are determined. And he gives an example very similar to the one I do when I talk about this. Let's say that I come home and there's a chocolate bar there, like he describes, and I do want that chocolate bar. Now, on the other hand, I could get on the treadmill, and I also have influences that way. The influences there are my physical health. I want to look even more like the young Jason Statham I know I can be. All those things are present there. I know I'll feel good. I'll have endorphins. Maybe I'll be more attractive to my wife. You know, those kind of things. Healthier, live longer. So there are influences in both directions. And what a person like this wants to say is, whichever thing you finally come down on and choose, well, that's the thing that had more desire points, let's say, in its favor, more influence points, we could say. Even though it seems obvious that I'd rather eat the chocolate bar, well, it may be that I'd actually rather get on the treadmill, because even though that isn't currently as pleasurable or whatever else, I desire it more because I desire the effects of it more. Whichever thing you choose, well, that just proves that's the thing that you desired more. Now, what seems to be missing here is that, of course, we have influences. We admit that we have influences. And we even say that those influences can impact the free will choice that we make. The answer is just that those influences influence, but they don't determine. That's the important difference there. So that you can identify influences that are consistent with a choice doesn't mean that you've demonstrated that those things determine the choice. We'll get back to exactly how all that might work in just a few minutes, but first, I've got terrible news. This is breaking, just coming in. It turns out that we missed something very simple all along. The Bible actually tells us, apparently, that God does not exist. Let's hear about that.
Did you know that the Bible says there is no God? Look it up. Psalm chapter 14, verse 1. The fool says in his heart, there is no God.
What is happening? What are we doing?
So free will, the ability to freely determine, make decisions and make choices without impediment. There's no outside force acting upon you. There is no, your volitions are entirely internal. I don't think that exists, to be honest. I think that when we talk about free will, we're talking at a few different levels here. We're talking in the everyday, experience-based conscious level, which tells me that, yeah, I totally have free will, man. I definitely walk around living my life like I do. I could do this anytime I want. Don't do that. I can do that anytime I want. It was my choice.
Or you could show it the way Searle shows it, where he says, when I do this, it seems like I just as easily could have done this instead. Seems intuitive that you could do that. Or you can cover your face in bubbles, your choice.
But why did I actually choose to do that? Well, I mean, I'm trying to get views on TikTok, so why not smash yourself in the face with some bubbles? I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of things that probably went into influencing that decision that happened probably 10, 15, 20 seconds before I even started this video. And I have no way of knowing what those are. The second level, though, neurology can tell us that, like, yeah, since about the 80s, we've been able to see your decisions roughly 10 to 12 seconds ahead of time before they happen. Just give us an fMRI and a couple of Colt 45s, we'll do the rest. Finally, we arrive at the cosmic level, the level where, I mean, I really think that we need to be talking to physicists here. And I'm going to expand on that in a future video. Stay tuned.
So science hasn't disproven free will, and I recommend to you the book by Alfred Mealy, Free, Why Science Hasn't Disproved Free Will. I read it a couple of times in preparation for my debate with Dan Barker, the president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, when I debated him on Unbelievable Radio. A lot of this goes back to some similar scientific experiments. Many people will mention the Libet experiments, where basically people were asked to arbitrarily stop a clock or push a button at a particular time. And they had electrodes on their heads and things like that. And they found that there was actually some brain activity or something that showed, the choice they were going to make before the person actually made the move to make a choice. In one more recent example of the experiment, you had two boxes with buttons on them and light bulbs above them, and you push one button or the other, and before the person would be able to push the button, the light would come on of the button they were going to push. And so this is really impressive because, oh my gosh, it looks like we know what's going to happen before anyone makes a choice. So your body makes this choice before you become aware of it, and that's all very interesting. There are a number of problems with this. The guy who ran the initial experiments mentioned that what he thought it showed was not that we don't have free will, but that we do have free won't. That what a person could do is they could veto the decision. They call this a veto power over the decision to make a particular choice. So even though there may have been an impulse to choose a particular thing, they could decide to retract that or not make that choice. So you don't have free will, you have free won't or something like that. Secondly, one of the problems with these experiments is that they really are, there's an important distinction that you can access in your own mind. There is a very serious difference between what we might call choosing and what we might call picking. Now, I'm just using these terms. These terms are used this way by some people, but we know that picking and choosing can be synonyms, but we're actually playing with that here because what we're saying with picking something, so a choice might be something like, who do I want to marry, or where do I want to go to grad school, or even where do I want to go to dinner tonight after work, or something like that. But picking, you might think of as more like when you're walking into a gas station and there's a double door there. Which side of the double door do you go through? Well, you're not thinking too much about that. In fact, the fact that you're not thinking too much about that is why sometimes you look like a dum-dum when you're pushing a pull door or pulling a push door. You see what I mean? We don't actually think too much about those decisions, and so I'm happy to admit that it may well be that we're just kind of moving on impulse. But even there, it seems that we do have the power to veto that if we so choose. But the difference between picking, especially when you're telling people to try not to think about when they're going to do it, just to kind of be arbitrary with when you pick, versus thinking about a decision where there's a lot of cognitive chaos and you're weighing decisions. These are very different things anyway. But I encourage Alfred Mealy's book Free, because what you'll find is that no, science has not disproven free will.
My favorite argument for God's existence is that I believe in free will. Okay, the reason that I think this is an argument for God's existence is your ideas, your ability to comprehend the universe is a reflection of a reality, of an objective truth that is out there. That says to me that there is a God, there's a common source that stands behind that objective truth and stands behind the mind that can comprehend that truth.
What? This is not a good argument for God's existence. The free will that we have is more like a faux free will, kind of like a complex ability to choose, because we have the ability to choose between the options that present to us. But this sort of absolute free will that a lot of apologists think we have, I just don't believe that we do. Also, Ben Shapiro seems to couple the existence of God with being able to know true things, or being able to know absolutely true things about reality, and I just don't see a connection there. He needs to build that connection first.
Hey, John, if you're watching this, so the first thing that John, the godless engineer, says here is basically just that he doesn't believe. It sounds like what he's saying is he's a determinist, but perhaps a compatibilist. That's someone who affirms determinism, but believes that a way of thinking about free will can still be had on determinism. But it's determinism, okay? It's still determinism. And I think John would tell you that if he's a compatibilist determinist here. What he's rejecting is the notion of free will that we've been talking about, where you perhaps could have done other than whatever you ended up doing, or nothing external to you. It may have influenced it, but nothing external to you determined your actions, at least in some cases. When he says he doesn't believe in free will in the absolute sense that some apologists do, this also needs comment, because to say that you believe in it in the absolute sense might be something like to say, well, I can freely choose not to be sick, or I can freely choose to fly like a bird even though I don't have the ontology of a bird, or something like that. Obviously, we don't believe that you're free to do whatever you want to do, that you're just able to do anything you imagine. We don't mean that. Or that you can just decide not to have poor vision, or decide not to have liver failure, or whatever thing that it is. That's not the kind of free will we're talking about. What most of the apologists are talking about is libertarian free will, and that's what we've been already discussing. But that's what he's calling absolute free will. But in case there's anyone here who's thinking, wait, do you hold to that type of free will where it really is absolute? You can just do whatever you want as long as you can imagine it because you're free. No, that's not what we're saying. But let's get to this Ben Shapiro thing, because I'm not 100% sure what Ben Shapiro is arguing here, but it sounds very similar to, from the clip I'm seeing, to what I've argued and others have argued. But I argued in my debate with Matt Dillahunty that libertarian free will was a good reason to believe that God exists. So let's go back to what Godless Engineer said toward the end of his short.
Also, Ben Shapiro seems to couple the existence of God with being able to know true things, or being able to know absolutely true things about reality, and I just don't see a connection there.
So let's think about it specifically with respect to the issue of knowledge. I covered that a few years ago. Here's that.
Libertarian freedom does not exist, then it means that whatever we believe is merely what we were determined to believe. The fact is, it's not just your actions that are determined on determinism, but also your thoughts and your beliefs. So while you may think you have good reasons for believing that 2 + 2 = 4, that you're watching a debate right now, or that bald-headed bearded men are the most attractive kinds of men, those and all other beliefs were determined and could not have been otherwise. This means that you are not free to choose against those things which are irrational. That means that you can affirm determinism, you can affirm atheism, but you can't rationally affirm anything at all, including your determinism. As atheist philosopher John Searle says, quote, actions are rationally accessible if and only if the actions are free. The reason for the connection is this: rationality must be able to make a difference. Rationality is possible only where there is a genuine choice between various rational and irrational courses of action. If the act cannot be otherwise, then rationality can make no difference. It doesn't even come into play, end quote.
So yeah, if determinism is true, I don't know how you could claim justified knowledge.
It's also very common for believers to sort of remove the accountability from their God by leaning on the free will myth, the idea that we have free will and therefore we are to blame, despite their God being omnipotent and omniscient.
I mean, this idea that we're just trying to remove blame from the Creator and put it on ourselves. I mean, why don't we talk about what's actually true? Because if we're talking about motivations here, I'm not saying that you're actually doing this. I have no reason to think that you are, but I could just turn that around and say the reason that people that don't believe in free will don't want free will is because they don't want to be responsible for the stuff they do that's egotistical and wrong. They'd rather be able to just put that on the universe or God or whatever else. But that doesn't really get us anywhere.
Free will cannot logically exist under the rule of a truly omniscient deity. Omniscient meaning all-knowing. If he knows what's going to happen, then the illusion of choice, the illusion of free will is just that. It's an illusion. So the free will myth is a way for believers to completely remove any accountability from their deity and blame it on his own creations.
Now, you'll hear this all over TikTok and all over YouTube. This idea that if God has omniscience, then free will is just simply impossible, because if God knows what's going to happen, and it will happen, then things could not have been otherwise. But understand something, and this is important, just remember this. Knowledge isn't causal. Just because God knows what's going to happen doesn't mean he caused it to happen. His knowing it doesn't have a causal relationship. It doesn't make it happen just because he knows it. Now, that he knows it means that it will happen, but it doesn't mean it was determined to happen. It just means he knows what free creatures will do in time, and he's not wrong about it. But it doesn't mean that they weren't free. If someone were to record a football game, and everything in the football game, it was all on, we had a big wide angle, and we see it all. We see everything that happens. We see all the cheerleaders. We see the plays. We see, let's say it's the Super Bowl, we see the halftime show. We see the guy holding up the John 3:16 sign. We see everything. Okay. Now, if I've seen that, now I'm not God, I can't see it ahead of time, but if I've seen that happen, the video of that, then when I go to show it to you, I know already before you see it what you're going to see. But that doesn't mean that I determined the actions of all the players. Now, this is an analogy, and so it doesn't have complete correspondence, because in God's case, he knows everything from outside of creation, outside of time. Nevertheless, I think the point is still made. Just because God knows what's going to happen doesn't mean that he caused it to happen in exactly that way.
So I think this idea that a lot of believers have, that the reason that atheists are atheists is because we've gone through some trauma, which, while in some cases may be the case, especially because a lot of atheists become atheists after having suffered extreme religious trauma. That doesn't mean that all atheists have suffered a trauma in order to have become atheists. They simply were never believers to begin with, like myself. So again, no hate to this commenter whatsoever. I just wanted to clear up that misconception.
I'll go a step farther for you. Not only do not all atheists become atheists because of religious trauma, I'll even say that in some cases where it is religious trauma that begins the search, that serves as a catalyst to then looking at other evidences. That's totally possible. Let's get back to what happens to be true.
So, fun coincidence. My family is Catholic. So the reason I'm an atheist is because I actually did a read through of a few religious texts, and after reading them, I just kind of noticed that there was a lot of contradictions, a lot of stuff in them didn't make sense, and then I kind of went down the rabbit hole of looking into this stuff, and after going into the rabbit hole, I just didn't really have any faith anymore. It's pretty much the story of most atheists. I am nothing special, so... Thank you for the question, though, and I hope you have a good one.
I like this guy. I like the vibe of this video. He seems like a really nice guy. But he says that he read some religious texts, found some contradictions, and then just found that he didn't have any faith anymore and didn't believe. Well, I appreciate the honesty, but I'm sure he would, or I would suspect that he would admit, seems like a bright guy, seems like he would admit that just because you found contradictions in some texts doesn't mean even that those texts are false, much less that the religion is false, or at the very least that God doesn't exist. I don't see how any of this gets you to atheism. It doesn't make any sense to me. If I became convinced today that there were problematic things that were contradictory in the Bible, depending on what those things are, I guess, I don't know that I would, I wouldn't become an atheist. I might change my views about biblical inerrancy or something, but it wouldn't mean that Christianity is false or that God doesn't exist. I used to, when I was younger, I would say as a preacher, I'd say things like, if one word in the Bible is false, it's all false. But ask yourself, was I right? The truth is that doesn't even work logically. If one part of the Bible is false, all of it's false. Now, I don't think it's false, but I'm just saying, that wouldn't even make any sense. It'd be like saying, oh, here's like a world-class math textbook, But there is a mistake on page 147. Oh, well, then nothing in it is correct. Well, no, that's not true. That's not true at all. So I don't understand exactly what's going on here, but the notion that there would be contradictions wouldn't be a game changer. But then on top of that, I'd want to know what those contradictions are. We could talk about it with respect to the Bible anyway.
So if you're an atheist on the internet or someone who questions religious beliefs on the internet like I am, you've seen plenty of times believers responding to us saying that based on the Bible, God sends people to hell by saying that, no, God gave us free will, so we choose to go to hell. And the reason that God gave us free will is so that we would love him. But what I don't think they understand that they're saying there is that God foresaw that free will would cause us to go to hell and gave it to us anyway because he wanted to be loved exactly the way he wanted. And that that's more important to him than his creation not burning for eternity.
So the way that this has just been described is not exactly the way I see it, but let me ask you this. If that was the case, what are we saying here? You just don't like it? I mean, I understand the vibe of what you're saying, but I don't think you or anyone else should be under the impression that if there's something claimed about reality that I don't like, it must not be true, right? Now, maybe he would make some sort of an argument from evil or argue that if we conceive of God this way, that makes him evil and go a step further. I mean, that's clearly what we're shooting towards. But now we have to ask you what your understanding of hell is, because it seems like what's objectionable is not that we live and die, although we might object to that too, but it's the eternal, like everlasting nature of a fiery hell that he has the most problem with. People that hold to the traditional view, which the idea of hell that you were describing would be categorized under the traditional view of eternal conscious torment, don't necessarily hold, all of them, that this is like literal fire or something. The fire could be imagery or something like that, but it is an eternal conscious state of suffering of some sort outside of the presence of God. And then on top of that, my friend Chris State is the head of Rethinking Hell, and Rethinking Hell puts forward the conditional immortality perspective. I would want to know, this question is really impacted most by what you're understanding about the nature of hell, because that seems to be where the objection has traction in this discussion.
Do humans have free will? This is something that I still struggle with even today, but as of now, I don't currently believe that free will exists. So essentially, I believe that our thoughts and intentions and actions are based off of previous background causes that we may or may not even be conscious of. This is a good quote from Sam Harris that I think breaks down the free will thing pretty well. It says, "Free will is an illusion. Our wills are simply not of our own making. Thoughts and intentions emerge from background causes of which we are unaware and over which we exert no conscious control." We do not have the freedom we think we have. So think about this for a minute. If you believe in libertarianism, where basically you think that you could have made a different decision if you were given the chance to basically rewind time and go back to before your decision, you believe that you could have made a different decision. So let's think about this for a second. Let's say that you jump back in time and all of your neurons are firing exactly the same. You don't know the outcome of the action that you are about to do yet. Your state of mind is exactly the same. Everything is exactly the same. Everything fell in line exactly to be just before you made that decision, and your state of mind was exactly the same. Do you really believe you would have been able to make a different conscious decision than the outcome that was laid out in front of you? Now, I'm not a philosopher or a philosophy professor or anything of that matter, nor am I an expert of any sort, so sorry if I'm referring to people who know more about this free will argument than I do. I'm still pretty new to it myself. This is yet another Sam Harris quote, so please excuse me if I'm referring back to him a lot. He words things pretty well, but he says here, "You didn't choose your gender or most of your life experiences. You had no control whatsoever over your genome and the development of your brain." And now your brain is making choices on the basis of preferences and beliefs that have been hammered into it over a lifetime, by your genes, your physical development, since the moment you were conceived, and the interactions you have had with other people, events, and ideas. Where is the freedom in this? Once again, I'm not super well versed in the philosophy behind free will, so I'm a layman and I'm no expert, so I would love to hear your guys' thoughts. Do you think free will exists?
Now, these are some thoughtful comments, and I appreciate the spirit with which they're asked and the humility. So you'll recall that I said at the beginning that influences, we believe that you have influences. The thing is, we don't believe those influences determine what you're going to do. So your biology, your impulses, desires, smell, sight, all your sensory input, your plans, your ideas about the future, your beliefs, all these things are going to play into what you end up doing. And that's true. Those are influences on you. But the question is, if you rolled it back, this is called the rollback problem. If you rolled it back, libertarians seem to be saying that you could have done other than whatever you ended up doing. If we rolled it back, you might well have done other. Okay, so the question is, what would explain that? Because it seems like it at least needs, well, it seems like it has intuitive force that, hey, if we put you in the same situation with the same thoughts, the same ideas, the same desires, it seems like, of course, you would just do exactly the same thing. That seems intuitive. Or at least it needs some sort of explanation for why you would have done something different one of those times when everything was the same. Now, first of all, I think that this kind of just begs the question of determinism again anyway. But there is actually something more that I want to say. I could just stop here and say, I make the decision, I'm the determiner. And if you rolled it back, maybe one of those times I would determine to do something else. I determine among my influences what I'm going to permit. I determine my actions or determine my choices out of those influences. But let's just say we wanted to go further. Okay, well, one thing we could say is what Robert Kane says in the Oxford Handbook on Free Will, where he argues that perhaps when we remember the issue between picking and choosing, perhaps when we're thinking about choosing, that what is going on is there is this cognitive chaos that happens where we're really struggling over the right decision to make. And in that struggle, perhaps indeterminacy results. Others have done work on this from quantum mechanics and said, look, there's evidence that indeterminacy, things that are not determined, that indeterminacy happens at the quantum level. It's just that what people who would like to use that to advocate for free will, well, it can't be, those are quantum level, like very small things. That doesn't happen up at the macro level of our everyday existence and our choosing. But perhaps if you had this cognitive chaos where you really don't know, that can amplify the indeterminacy up to the level of our choices. Kane gives an example of where you imagine that a woman is on her way to the office where she suspects she's going to get a major job promotion that she's been working for 10 years to get. This is going to be a major life moment. Everything for the past 10 years has been working toward this. And then on her way, she passes by an alley and sees someone in trouble. They're about to be mugged. And you can do whatever you want to make this reasonable. Maybe she has a gun. Maybe she could call someone for help. But the idea is that if she stops to do this, then she will miss her meeting and miss the promotion. Okay, but someone's safety and perhaps life is on the line. These are two very strong impulses. So what does she do? Well, she has reasons, right? She has reasons why she would go to the meeting, and she could tell you all about those things and why she wants to go to the meeting. And if it turns out she goes to the meeting, she can tell you why she went to the meeting. It's not like she doesn't know. It's not like it was random. And if she decides to help the person that's in the alley, she can tell you why she did that. Of course she can. It's not like it was random. But what happens is, if something like Kane and others' idea is correct, is that when that struggle is taking place in her mind, when she is pitted, these two ideas are pitted against each other, these two possibilities, that in that cognitive chaos, the indeterminacy is not the thing that is most important, but it is an ingredient in the choosing process. And so it may well be that she helps the person in the alley, and then another time it might well be that she goes to the office, all things being equal, except for the indeterminacy that becomes a part of the mix. But because it's a part of the mix, you still these people would argue that you still have some kind of control. And so you get the rollback problem answered. You get how do we choose among our influences, and it answers some of those things. There are still criticisms that can be raised against it, and I'm not naive to that. I'm just saying that this is the sort of thing that can be brought up. Now, that's if it all happened just naturally. There's nothing supernatural required necessarily for that sort of an explanation. But if God exists, I'm a theist over here. If I'm a theist and I think God exists, you might say, yeah, but the idea that that would happen that way is just so unlikely. Well, all I'm looking for is a defeater. By that, I mean, all I'm looking for is some possible explanation for how it could be that you could have real free will in reality. Now, if God exists and I already know that it's perhaps possible, naturally speaking, just unlikely, well, then God could make certain that something like that happens in every single instance that I make a choice, or at least in the ones that are morally important. And so all I do with that is just to throw out some sources for you to give you an idea of how this could work and to send you on a research path of your own. But if you want to listen to more on this, here's a video right here where I talk about it with Sam Harris, who he's been referencing, where I talk about it with respect to Sam Harris. I'm not talking with Sam Harris. All right, so with that, let's take one more look at one more video that is sure to leave us on an interesting note.
So this commenter is asking me to define what free will is. Okay, so basically what Christian theology states is that God created mankind with the ability to either accept or reject him. So free will is, or the illusion of free will, is one of my favorite topics, and I'll explain why. With the God model that we are given in Christian theology, we have an omniscient, omnipresent God whose will is absolute. So God is sovereign. His will cannot be superseded by man's will.
Okay, so I just want to tell you, this sounds like this particular guy has had some strong exposure to Calvinism, because there's some Calvinist ideas that come up here, at least seem to. And Calvinism is a way of, well, it's a soteriological position that has to do with anthropology and salvation and free will, and it is a determinist Christian perspective. Now, the reason I think this guy's had some exposure to Calvinism is, well, you'll see, but one of the things is his use of the word sovereign here. Now, it's true that God is in control of everything, but many Calvinists, Christian determinists, speak as though God's sovereignty means that he is, that he definitely does determine everything. He's sovereign over all things, so he's determining all things. Okay, but that's not what the word sovereignty means. We don't have to come up with a new definition for what sovereignty means. We know what sovereignty means because sovereignty is already a word. What is a sovereign? A sovereign is a king. God is a king. God is a sovereign. What does it mean to be a sovereign? Well, a sovereign is in control of his realm. He can step in at any time. He can do whatever he pleases. He can dole out rewards and punishments whenever he wants to in his realm. Well, these are all things that are true of God. These are all things that the Bible says that God is and God does. God is sovereign. But what sovereignty never meant is that this king, who's sovereign over his realm, controls the movement of every molecule in a deterministic way, which includes the choices of the people in his kingdom all the time. Now, you say, yeah, but we're talking about God. Well, as my co-host Jonathan Pritchett would say, words don't necessarily supermean things just because you're talking about God. What changes when we're talking about God is not what the word sovereign means, but his realm. God's realm is the whole cosmos. It's not just some patch of land that some human king can control. His realm is the entire cosmos. And in the entire cosmos, God can step in. He can do as he pleases. He can dole out rewards and punishments. He can do whatever he wants in his cosmos. He's in control. But just like with the human king, has been, I think, sometimes freighted onto this word sovereignty that it never meant was, well, because it's God, it must mean that control must mean, and sovereignty must mean he's determining everything. Why? Sovereignty is his position of authority. How he chooses to exercise that authority is a different question. He could exercise that position of authority through determinism if he so chose, I guess. But he could exercise that sovereignty by giving man free will and then functioning as a sovereign, as I think the Bible teaches that he does.
But simultaneously, we're supposed to believe that we have free will to either accept or reject God, even though God knows the outcome that will ultimately happen. I can give you an example of this from Scripture. You have the story of Peter's denial of Jesus. Okay, so Jesus is talking to Peter, and he says to Peter, "Before the cock crows in the morning, you will deny me 3 times." So Peter says, "No way, I'm not going to deny you. I'd never do that." And then the story goes on. Peter is asked if he is a follower of Jesus's, and Peter's afraid to get arrested, so he denies Jesus 3 times. Cock crows, Peter goes off and cries about it. In that rare instance, okay, we see someone who is told what the future will bring and is given an opportunity to change it. And Peter says that there's no way, I'm not going to do that. He's sure of himself. He says, this is what I'm going to do. I'm not going to deny you. And then transpires that he goes and does it. He has no choice or free will to go against what the future is, because God, in that instance, is shown to be the author of that future. He's made it predestined that Peter would deny Jesus.
Now, you'll recall that we spoke just a moment ago about knowing something is going to happen not being causal. Just because God knows, and of course God does cause things. He does step in. The Bible teaches that. We see that in Scripture. He steps in. But that doesn't mean but just because he knows everything doesn't mean he causes everything. We already covered that, but you'll see that mistake coming up again here. So I love this because this is exactly the example I give to make the opposite point. God's omniscience, God knowing the future, it doesn't mean that he's causing what happens to happen in a deterministic sense. And with Peter, yes, Jesus tells him that he's going to deny him. And that's what happens to Peter. He denies him. Oh, so Peter didn't really have a choice. If he had chosen otherwise, God would have been wrong. No, if he had chosen otherwise, God would have known otherwise from eternity, and Jesus would have predicted otherwise. See, the only way you get this backwards is if you presume that God knowing something is the same as God causing something. But see, I believe God is incredible enough. He knows what's going to happen without having to cause it. But in any case, that it happens the way he said it would happen doesn't mean he determined it. It just means he knows. Now, he goes on to do a similar thing with Judas. And so since I've already explained the reasoning, and Dr. Jonathan Pritchett has a TikTok on our channel on TikTok about this very issue with Judas, let's just move on to how he wraps things up.
So we have 2 examples, okay, right from Scripture that shows that an omniscient, omnipresent God whose will is sovereign goes above the will of his creation, and that his creation does not have the ability to surprise God. That means our destiny, okay, whether we believe or we reject God, is not something that we actually have control over, according to the God model of the Bible. The God of the Bible actually predestines people to either be saved or to be punished for eternity, and that's why I don't believe in him.
So you don't believe in a Calvinist understanding of God, and you believe the Bible gives you a Calvinist take on God. I'm sitting here rejecting Calvinism and listening to what you've just said, and I see nothing that you've just said that establishes the points that you're trying to make. But that said, you seem like a super nice guy, and I wish you well. Okay, so that was fun, and now let's go to some written comments. So to start off the comments this week, this comes to us from Imago9059. Says, I think to some degree, atheists take a stand on refuting the idea of being born sinful. Now, this is because we've had a lot of questions about original sin and how the notion that you might be born not just with a nature and an environment inclined towards sin, as I affirm, but also a guilt nature in which you're personally guilty for Adam's sin before you're born or at the moment of birth. Atheists take a stand of refuting the idea of being born sinful. They see themselves as born innocent, thus blameless, unless they commit horrid crimes. However, we know we are all sinful, and the only one that could erase or pay that initial sin was Jesus, blameless and sinless, our Lord Jesus Christ. an infamous crusader, 2183, says about that. Additionally, it is worth noting that they place a standard that is acceptable either to themselves or society and do not view transgression in the same view as God. Now, the broad brush, we don't want to do a broad brush here. Just because this is true of some atheists doesn't mean it's true of all atheists. But it does seem like we've had a lot of this lately, this rejection of the notion. It's just, this whole thing falls apart because we're born guilty. I didn't even have a chance. But as I said in the last video, you still sin on your own. And even if we restricted it to, like, say you don't believe in sin, even things that you think are wrong. Are you saying you've never done that? You've never thought, man, I was kind of a jerk to that person. I shouldn't have done that. Right? We've all done things that are wrong. But yeah, this is actually an interesting idea. I do believe it's true. Some atheists have this idea that, hey, look, I mean, yeah, maybe I'm not perfect, but I'm not like someone who deserves to go to hell. I'm not someone who doesn't deserve whatever the Christians think they deserve because I haven't done anything particularly horrible. You know, I'm a good person by cultural standards of today. But this is the problem. I think about this many times when skeptics and atheists refer to the things that they think we Christians are bigoted about. Almost certainly some of your views will be considered bigoted in 100 years. The thing is, we're talking about our culture at a particular point in time. And it's pretty naive to think that the way our culture exists at any particular time is the best way a culture could exist, or even closer to the way it should be than in every other place and every other time on the timeline. That's a little bit temporally provincial. Now, when you move out of that even more and say, who cares what any particular person thought at any point in history, when you compare our wicked acts, even whatever you think is wicked, or however you would frame that up, compare that to God's holiness, it simply pales in comparison. Now, I received a message sometime recently from Michael Jones over at Inspiring Philosophy, who, you know, is a friend of mine. He sent me this video, and I'm going to play it for you now. And even if you're tempted to click away, don't do it. Endure this. I know it's going to be difficult for half of you. Let's see how it goes.
Hi, I'm Nathan the Cat Lady. Did you know that every day in America, roughly 2 million terrible people say they hate cats? Beautiful kitties like Ginger here.
Ugh.
But now there's hope. For just one share a day, you can shove my videos right down their throats. Remind them that they're no longer the majority, that there's something wrong with them, and that they're the ones that need to be fixed.
Okay, we can't do any more of that. Real Captain Awesome said one day ago on YouTube, I have been a believer for 14 years, but after hearing IP defend cats, makes me question my faith. This is what you want, IP? This is what you want for the people? You want to cause people to question their Christianity because you're shoving all these cats in their face? I think you need to get your head in the game, pal. In all seriousness, no. I'm not a fan of cats. I've owned cats, but look, the thing about it is, if you're happy with a cat, it's one of the creatures that God made. It's an incredible evidence of design and God's beautiful creations. Cats can be beautiful. If you're the type of person that owns a cat, hey, that's great. I'll still even come to your house. I don't have any weird allergies or anything. Quit looking at me like that. I like cats. Cats are great. It's fine. Before we go real quick, someone did send us some footage that they think is proof, like evidence or proof of the existence of Kangaroo. I just want to say occasionally someone will ask me, do you really not believe in Kangaroo? Look, when someone asked me that, I put two emojis, one with the wink emoji and one with the Pinocchio nose emoji when they asked me if I really believed in Kangaroo. I'll explain one day how to interpret that, but for now, let's take a look at this footage. Okay, so this is, there's a couple of things here. First of all, I will admit, I mean, clearly it's been doctored. Here's what I will admit. The dog is real, okay? We're confident about that. But I'm not just choosing that arbitrarily. I want you to look at the plumes of, run it back and play it again. Look at the plumes of dust and dirt that come up When that dog runs down that road, I mean, that is real. That dog's feet are hitting the ground, are hitting the ground, and it's producing airborne debris, dust, dirt, things like that. When the alleged kangaroo bolt down the street, like right, that fast, huh? Down the street. One of them's not even on the street, which could mean that the digital animation was off a little bit. It looks like he's over in the wood, on the grass. I'm telling you the truth. There is some debris that comes off of the kangaroo one time. There's the one on the closest to the camera. His feet hit, and some debris comes up, which could clearly be done by just with some simple effects that even I could do, probably. Just throw something at the dirt at the right moment or something. But what they've done that's so clever is to intersperse these two alleged animals with the dog, which is really in the shot. So what you have here is you wouldn't know this if you're not a camera guy like me, but this is a long-standing practice in Hollywood to give the impression that fake characters are real, is that you put them in. I mean, have you ever seen Roger Rabbit? Have you ever seen Bed Knobs and Broomsticks? If you haven't, it's a classic. Or let's just get a little more on the nose. There was a time before computer-generated graphics got as good as they currently are in consumer products at home, like the person who made this video. They weren't as good. So let me give you an example of a similar thing, but before the CG got good enough that it kind of did look real.
It's you. Yeah, it's me. Love the jacket, Charlie. It's hard to get something that fits my shoulders.
This is from what somebody tried to pass off as a documentary about a kangaroo called Kangaroo Jack. I'm just telling you, if you can't look at these two videos and see, I mean, Kangaroo Jack is clearly fake. So whatever you think about the other video, just notice that Kangaroo Jack is clearly fake, and anyone who believes that he's not fake is a complete. So what you need to walk away from this today knowing is I did show you a fake kangaroo that someone was trying to pass off as alive. On last Friday's live stream, we conducted a poll to see what the kangaroo that is right here would be named. And for some of you, so we had 4 options. The first one was Brad, because my daughter's friend wanted it named Brad. Then there was Jeremy and Lee, 2 separate options. The name, Jeremy Lee, of the one who invited me to Australia twice now. And lastly, Figment. Because it's obvious, isn't it? Figment 1. The problem, of course, is that is a trademarked name by Disney Company. And so as a result, we're going to have to go with the runner-up. The runner-up and the name of the kangaroo over my right shoulder by your second best vote will always be Brad the kangaroo. And lastly, on a somewhat more serious note, I just want to say that there were some things discussed in this week's episode that had discussions of suffering and evil and things like that. And of course, as I said, there are times when every Christian wonders, God, where are you in the midst of all of this? And my daughter, my oldest daughter, when she was very small, was in a room one night. I was putting her to bed, and she said, Daddy, I don't want to be alone in the dark. She said, don't turn off my light. I don't want to be alone in the dark. And I said, well, honey, you won't be alone. God's in here. She said, he is. And she craned her neck to look into the closet. And I said, yeah, he's here. You can't see him, but he's here. She said, yeah, he's here somewhere. You know what? She went to bed that night. She slept. She just believed her daddy. Her daddy said that she wasn't alone. She knew she wasn't alone. She believed. And she still believes me when I tell her that. She still knows it's true. She's getting older. She's learning more about God. She'll have her own experiences with God. But I want to tell you, whoever you are and whatever struggle you're experiencing right now, you may not see it. You may struggle to find him. But he's here. Trust that and reach out to him today. And we'll see you next time on Trinity Radio.